Welcome to Unemployed and Afraid, a podcast that explores the glorious mess of building your own business with the people doing it. I'm your host and fellow business builder, Kim Curtin. Thank you for being here. Let's get into some good, honest, small business chat. Hello, listener and brave business builder doing the do every day to create something incredible. You're amazing, but I am curious. Have you ever suffered from FOPO? I just learned about this from my guest you're about to hear from. It's the fear of posting online, and I have definitely suffered from this. In fact, I just posted something to my socials that's a little more left of center than the usual. So I've kind of got fear of posting online after posting online, maybe fear after posting online, but that's besides the point. Building a presence wherever our customers or potential collaborators are is imperative, and arguably LinkedIn is a hugely unique one in its ability to help us craft real connections that often end up in a Zoom meeting and professional opportunity. But this episode isn't about LinkedIn, it's about Joe, who defied his past assumption of not being creative to move into a highly creative content business as a ghostwriter for thought leaders on LinkedIn. In the sharing of his own business building story, you'll hear about breaking out from the box you've been put in, writing as a tool to finding headspace, being patient with the right time to go all in on a side hustle, communicating value over dollar cost, how to market yourself when your work isn't meant to be seen, and the potential of your professional presence on LinkedIn. Let's get into it. I'm here with Joe McKay, a solopreneur developing a powerful business in LinkedIn as a ghostwriter and content partner to help B2B founders and consultants find and own a thought leadership niche. Now, if you've listened to any of my previous Unemployed and Afraid episodes, you already know I'm a massive fan of the LinkedIn platform, both for its ability to empower you with crazy levels of hyper-targeted learning and development, and to connect you directly with people who will positively impact your professional potential. So I'm super excited to hear and share more about creating a business from the platform. But as a business owner, finding your thought leadership presence isn't always easy, and especially if you doubt your writing ability or simply can't find the time. That's where Joe and his business comes in. He works with busy Australian founders and consultants to create their thought leadership content, craft their unique LinkedIn presence through powerful writing, and help them move from content to conversations to conversion. Such an interesting business niche, and I can't wait to hear all about how you're building it. Joe, welcome to Unemployed and Afraid.
Thanks so much, Kim. Thank you for having me.
It's my absolute pleasure. And we will come in with a hard-hitting question first, because in reading a little bit about you, there's some really wonderful stories about your family life and how you and your wife moved to France and all of these interesting stories of getting to the stage of creating your own business that I want to get into. But how would your wife describe you?
That's so funny. I remember, so the last kind of day job I had before really getting into the business I'm in was a government role. And I remember I'd gone through the interview process and had been offered this role. And I remember saying to my wife, I'm just worried that it's going to be boring. And she just looked at me dead in the eye and she said, you're a boring man. This job will be perfect for you. Which
I couldn't love that anymore.
Yeah. Look, I think that there's a grain of truth to that. And she's French and English is a second language, but we're very different. You know, she's an interior designer. I studied civil engineering and commerce, worked in much more kind of numerical and boring type roles and environments over the years. And so, yeah, we complement each other well. So look, boring is one way she'd describe me. I think she'd hopefully also describe me as someone who's willing to try new things and go on adventures and someone who's curious and open to seeing more.
The honesty that we experience through our relationships are, very entertaining sometimes. And only those people could get away with that, and knowing that is actually meant with love and support and actually encouragement through that it's very funny. So before your LinkedIn ghostwriting business, who were you?
I was someone who I think probably put myself into a box and probably let people around me put me into a box as well of being someone who isn't necessarily creative, someone who's very kind of logical, rational, straight down the line. And so I probably pigeonholed myself a little bit with that and took my career in places that sort of aligned with that. Having said that, I worked in a whole bunch of different fields because while following that kind of mold, I never really landed in a place that felt right. I took a lot of different paths, different turns to try and find who I was, so to speak, particularly from a professional point of view.
Those stories that we hear about ourselves are so plaguing, aren't they? Those I'm not the creative type, or I'm not the type to finish things, or I'm not the type to be able to concentrate. I always find my school feedback really interesting to look back on, as like, would be really great if she could just apply herself. So I think that one probably rings true. But yeah, there's many of those things and aspects about ourselves I find that hold us back from the potential. And of course, writing is fundamentally creative because you are pulling together ideas and you are forming them into a way. You're meeting a brief, you're interpreting a brief, you're finding the language. It is fundamentally creative. So how and when did you make that shift to discover this part of yourself? What were you doing before, and how did it come into your life?
I mentioned that government role that I was in. This is coming into early 2022. My wife was pregnant with our second child, and as I mentioned, she's French, so she wanted to have the baby around her friends and family back in France. So we made the call, and despite being a boring man, the job wasn't, I guess, ticking all the boxes. And so we made that call for me to leave the job, move to France, live with family and have the baby over there. And basically we spent about 9 months in 2022 over in France. And most of that I wasn't working. So that became the clear space, some of the free time in amongst the bottles and nappies and all that family time, where I found myself just having a lot of thoughts, a lot of ideas, like random ideas, strands of thoughts and things, that reflections. And at some point started to write some of them down, and then at some point started to publish some of them on LinkedIn. And I found just having that outlet, like writing them down, letting them go, unclogged the brain a little bit, and new thoughts were arriving rather than going round and round in circles on the same idea. So then I kind of committed to it as a bit of a process that was cathartic, therapeutic. And after a while started to get people reaching out and saying that they'd liked what I was writing and have I thought about working in this space and things like that, which I hadn't at all. It really was just an outlet for me to jot down some of the ideas and thoughts I was having. But from that point, late 2022, I really started to look into this world of content creation, writing, LinkedIn ghostwriting and all that kind of stuff. And here we are.
I wrote down there on my little notepad here, writing down and letting go. I find that really interesting because as a person who holds a lot in their brain, I am fundamentally interested in so many things. It can be really overwhelming. I also have 2 businesses I'm trying to grow at the same time. And thought leadership is such a big part in both of those. And I find that a really interesting concept because as those who have thoughts of leadership potential that they want to share, that takes a little time to get comfortable with putting them out there. Churning over that content, or churning, I shouldn't call it content really, but churning over those ideas and putting them out into the world in some way, shape or form, that process can feel really overwhelming. And you don't know when it's done. You're like, or where it should live or how it should be out there or what's going to happen if I put this out there. There's a lot of stop markers before putting an idea out there. For you, how do you know and how did it differ from how you knew then to now when an idea was formed enough to be released out into the world?
I don't think how well formed the idea is necessarily matters, particularly on a platform, particularly on social media platform like LinkedIn. My attitude to it has been repetition, has been I think of each idea as a Post-it note, stick it on the wall, stick hundreds of them on the wall. They fall down pretty quickly, and you scrunch them up and chuck them away. But some of them stick and you build on them and do develop them. And I actually think the best way for me to fully form ideas is to write them down and share them. And you then bring in audience feedback, building on ideas that other people might be having. And so I think it was an Irish expression I heard a while ago that no one ploughed a field by turning it over in their mind. And I think that applies to your content. At some point you just have to start ploughing the field and just getting stuff out. And a lot of it doesn't go anywhere or do anything or impact anyone, but it's that repetition, kind of committing to that process of doing it. That's where you hone the craft, I guess, and the ideas hopefully get better, or you get better at explaining them over time.
Thank you for that reminder, because that email that I've been sitting on, that email newsletter that I've been
Yeah, totally.
Making bigger than Ben-Hur in my head. I think I just have to hit send on whatever I've got. Now, listener will know I do that. I digress into something that I want to know. But hopefully that was helpful for others too in terms of turning around their ideas. But take me back to your idea. So the seed of this as a business and something that you could do for others. How did that start to form for you? And what were your first few steps in making it something real?
Yeah. So I still remember really clearly a former client of mine from a marketing agency that I worked at, an old client, sent me a DM on LinkedIn and just said, I'm really enjoying the content that you're sharing. Have you ever thought about working in this space? And that I've still got that kind of screenshot of that message in my feel good file. And I spoke to her recently, and that really was the catalyst to go, maybe there is something in this. I wasn't looking for it at the time. From there, it really just started with a super small pilot. I reached out to an old boss who was basically running a consultancy and just offered to write 10 posts for him for $500. Well, I offered to do it for free, but he said, I'll pay, what's your going rate? And I made up a rate.
As we all do.
Yeah, exactly. That's it. Started there and then I guess continued through my own platform to really commit to doing it. And it was very much kind of word of mouth and referrals early on and just gradually honing the craft, building the offer. And then I think the beauty of the work that I do and kind of offering LinkedIn services, LinkedIn's a great platform to market that with almost no barrier to entry, no cost to try it and to establish it and see what sticks. So that was really the start of it.
I'm going to be writing down this post-it note as a reminder for myself to do it as well. But being generous with your feedback to another person can just create such a ripple effect. Like, how interesting for that person to show up in your DMs and say, hey, you're pretty good at this. Have you thought about doing something with it to tee up an entire on-flow effect that then generates into a fully fledged business, after much trial and error and process, which of course I'm sure we'll get into a little bit more of. But just to be that generous with feedback for somebody else, there's not enough of us out there, I think, doing that for each other and just calling out what we notice, because it can really turn people into things that they wouldn't have seen for themselves. I've definitely had that and spoken about that experience that I've had with a past guest on this podcast who said something to me, and now all of a sudden I've got a consulting business. So I completely understand how impactful that can be to have on someone. So yeah, I think it's a reminder for all of us that there's probably a few people we notice doing interesting things that we could give some feedback to or call out something that we've noticed about them that they might not see themselves.
I couldn't agree more. It's such an easy thing to do, and I think it actually makes you feel good as well when you're the person giving nice feedback to, lifting someone else up. I think it's just a massive win-win. And so, yeah, I'm still grateful to this day for that message. And it legitimately was the start of where I am now.
And so where you were then to where you are now, and I understand that because you shared this with me prior, that it was a side hustle for a little bit for you. So talk to me about the process of balancing this gig as a side hustle while you were building and what that was like.
So I think this has been the key to me being able to keep going with it, was not the Hollywood, I'm quitting my job and I'm never coming back and I'm going all in on this thing from day one off the back of a nice message. Like, I think there was that there was that temptation, and I thought a lot about doing that. But in the end, I wanted to hedge my bets a little bit and build some security for the family. And so had a full-time job in marketing in a small tech business for about 12 months. So I managed, while we were on this break in 2022, I managed to kind of get that lined up and come back to Australia, because the dream had to end eventually. You can't be unemployed forever, and maternity leave finishing and things like that. But I think having that stability, the safety net for kind of that 12-month period was really beneficial for a couple of reasons. So first of all, I wasn't stressed about trying to find the next ghostwriting client every single week to pay the mortgage. But I think actually also when it comes to pricing your services and making it worthwhile, for me, this side hustle was going to be my evenings, my weekends. That time had a certain pretty high value to me. And so I wasn't willing to sell myself short and do work on the cheap. And, I think that actually helped me to build my offer and my skills to a point like this is the value that I know that it adds. And therefore this is the cost associated with that. And if, I was getting interest from people who, I guess, that didn't meet their budget or things like that, I wasn't in this sort of hamster wheel of trying to sort of race to the bottom and get as much work as I could and just keep things going. It kept me at that stable level without too much stress.
Yeah, and that pricing challenge is most certainly a stressful period. I think revenue is a stressful thing generally for everybody in this gig, cash flow, everything.
Yeah.
Pricing is definitely an experience in service-based industries that I can relate to as a challenge because, you're pricing a skill set, you're pricing knowledge, you're pricing so many more things than the work itself. Can you tell me a little bit more about some of those experiences of putting a price out there that feels right, refining it, maybe getting knocked back? So what's that pricing experience been like for you?
Yeah, it's hard. So I think for me, pricing, if you're getting objections or you're not kind of converting on prospects due to price, or even if they're telling you it's price, it's often usually about their perception of the value rather than the dollar cost. And so you either haven't done a good enough job of articulating what the value of what you do is, or the value that you can add to them actually isn't there because they're maybe not the best fit for you and the service that you offer. I tried not to tinker with the sticker price on my services too much, but really where I tried to tinker and adjust is the leads that I was attracting, the type of audience that I was talking to. So one learning in that for me was novices generally is you need to have high volume. If you're going to sell a low value offer to a novice, like someone who hasn't tried it yet, they're not going to have a high willingness to spend. So you're going to need a lot of them to have a viable business. So I had to shift away from that really novice kind of entry level LinkedIn 101 type market because that's not the premium market that's going to sign a 3 or a 6 month retainer for content services because they don't know the value yet. So I had to shift myself up the market a little bit, look at customers, prospects that maybe had some experience in trying to create content on LinkedIn or already understood the value that was there and had a budget and a willingness to spend on that. So that's, I think, my take on pricing. I mean, you definitely, before every kind of sales call or pitching call that you log into, I have this feeling of wanting to convert and make a sale and things like that. So that temptation's always there. Mm. But what I've learned over time is, and I believe in the offer and the value that it provides, is if there's an objection there, it's not necessarily about the techniques and overcoming those objections. It's more about shifting the audience that you're targeting.
Oh, I think this is so valuable for so many reasons. And I'm going to relate it back to, I guess, my industry just to see if I'm sort of understanding where you're coming from, because I think I've had a pretty similar experience. Now, we're connected on LinkedIn, so you know a little about my background. And the listener, if you've stuck with me, does too. Lots and lots of years in the audio business, lots and lots of years in the branded content business. And of course, now as a podcaster as well. But all of that is, I have a lot of experience in audio, and I have a lot of interest coming through to me directly for people who create podcasts and, want to grow them, but they're sort of, dipping a toe in, or they just haven't done it before. And, it's always, I think I've got an idea and I kind of want to get it going. And the market potential there is huge for that. There's heaps of people. I've got 20 leads in my mind right now who, if I created a product for them, would probably buy it. But that product would need to be really reasonably priced, because podcasting to the casual podcaster looks like it can be done from a bedroom with not much thinking or technicality. You can just whack on, have a chat about your favorite reality TV show, put it out there. And it's true. To some degree, it's true. You can do that. But if you do it for the purposes that I do it for, one, to create a podcast brand that supports people, or on the other side of my business, to do it so that it generates you a marketing return, that's more serious. And that requires a lot of strategic thinking. And so where I'm going with this is my target market is similar to yours. It's people who understand the potential of content marketing for their business, who know the power of podcasts, who've read the headlines, who know that if they take it seriously, they can generate some serious returns for their brand. And it's not necessarily the person who wants to dip into podcasting to, and enjoy it and see where it takes them. And that's a real challenge, because then all of a sudden you're got a higher value offering. It's less clients coming through. It's less obvious market potential, but you tend to just have a feeling that it's the right space. And like working on that customer profiling is such an interesting part of it. But it also requires a lot of trust to go, I'm going to know how to market to those people and convert them. And that's where I find quite a lot of us, myself included, get tripped up. How do you promote your services in such a way that it's attractive to your high-ticket customer profile? What have been some of your learnings as you've tweaked your offering and your sell and everything to get those people through the door? What are high-value customers like?
So I think the most effective way to get to any customer is talking really specifically to their pain points, challenges that they've experienced. So that novice podcaster hasn't experienced some of the pain points and challenges that we might have experienced around how do you actually grow an audience, distribute a podcast, market it, all the kind of stuff that goes into it. Like you said, they're thinking they can just hit record from their living room. So those pain points to a novice audience don't land. But for a small business or a solopreneur, whoever it is who's tried it and failed and struggled with those things, if you create content that talks to some of those pain points, that kind of gets on their radar much more effectively. So you don't always have the experience. You don't always know exactly what those customers' pain points are, especially if you're starting out. But I think it's about empathy and put that hat on, walk a mile in those shoes and try and think about, if I was the head of marketing at insert your target audience here, what would my challenges be and what would I be faced with? And I guess what are the high value problems that I would have or try and find budget to solve, and then create content around those. That's, for me, that's been my approach, and it seems to be working okay so far.
Fantastic advice for not just service-based industries, for product-based industries as well. Really good advice. Thank you. We talked about your side hustling for a little while, and of course now you're here full-time. So that is a journey in and of itself. Two-part question. I love those. My guests probably not so much, but my listener knows I love those. What brought you to going full-time? What was the decision maker to step into it full-time? And what has the experience been like, reality versus expectations, through the process of going in?
So the clincher, I guess the decision point came, I'd had about 12 months in this, basically as a marketing team of one in this tech startup, scale up. I'd been having some open conversations with the CEO, the founder of the business, about taking on a more, I guess, substantial leadership role. And I kind of sat down and reflected, and the side hustle was there and was going okay. And I just spoke to some mentors and some people around me and just, I guess, projected forward in 2 years, 3 years, 4 years' time. What gets me closer to the life that I want to be living? And is that a more substantial leadership role in this company, or is this me in charge of my own thing, running my own race, figuring out as I go? And, the answer to that question was pretty simple. And that's when I knew that I couldn't step into this leadership role. So then by the same token, also couldn't really just continue as things were either. So that became the catalyst, I guess, the decision point. In terms of part two and expectations versus reality, I made sure that I played golf once a week for the first 2 months, because I wanted that kind of reality for myself for a short period of time. And I did that even when I was stressed about kind of client work and building things. And, there's always something more you can be doing. But I've actually tried really hard to build time in for myself in my schedule. I think the biggest bump when it comes to expectations versus reality, the hardest landing I've had is, and the work that I do is just a rolling sequence of deadlines. So you submit a batch of content, the clock starts, you just reset the clock and start it again until the next batch is due. And so where having it as a side hustle was short bursts of that creativity, of that spark, of that creation, it's now Monday to Friday, and it's always on. And this is the business model. I'm not trying to build a huge agency with lots of leverage. Like, it's me. I'm the one doing the work. And that's the game plan, I guess, for now. So that's been, at times, that is hard to stay motivated, stay on track and keep on delivering good work without other tasks and things to break up the week, I guess.
Such timely context. I was quite literally just chatting earlier today about how do I manage the burnout that happens in business and in building, and in the phase where your brain is so full with so many things to do on scales of importance that can't be pulled apart. When it feels totally counterintuitive to relax and take time off, what can you do? I think, you almost skim past it there, but building in time for yourself into your schedule, I think, is something that so quickly can leave us as business owners. Like, once you get into the thick of it, it's like, oh yeah, but if I've seen some success here. So if I just knuckle down and really concentrate, I'll work all weekend. It's like, I'll sleep in or whatever, but I'll work all weekend. And, that'll help me do that next thing that's going to bring in more clients, or that new idea that I had that's going to bring in more potential or more listeners, or whatever the business is. But if you just have a few things in the schedule that are just for you, whether it's a reoccurring appointment for golf, or for, if you're absolute luxe inclined, going and getting a massage or something fantastic just for you, going to a yoga class, particularly working from home, when you chill at your workplace and you also work at your workplace and you sleep at your workplace, it's pretty challenging to find that difference. Has that been your experience as well, working from home and getting that balance and trying to do all those things? How's that going?
It is hard. The work from home thing is a challenge. I think there's a couple of small steps I take to try and tackle that. The first for me is having an office where I can close the door, going through a small ritual of end of the day, try and close the laptop, turn everything off, walk out, like tidy things up, close the door, try and physically close off from work. I think little routines like that definitely help. I also try and build in exercise and just outdoor stuff in the routine. So, I've got a little trailer at the back of the bike that I can drop the kids off at daycare. And most of the time it's roasting hot and it takes probably 3 times as long as it would in the car. But that becomes my kind of 2 times a day, just headspace and time out of the house. I also have used WeWork. I try and just occasionally just book a hot desk in a co-working space and jump on the train into the city and do the office thing, to try and line up a lunch or a coffee with friends or other people who work in the city and just, break up the space in as many ways as I can, because it definitely can feel like Groundhog Day sometimes.
What's that been like when you go into WeWork? I think that's really interesting because, we're so comfortable working from home as well, let's be honest. Like, I'm definitely wearing slippers while we're doing this interview. But what's it like naturally, but what's it like for you then being in that office, in that co-working space? What does it do for your thinking and your work output?
Really interesting. It actually, I feel like I produce totally different ideas, and I actually also find myself pushing myself to get stuff done so I can get back home in a sense, or it's like I can build that reward for myself that if I do finish early, then I can get the earlier train and do whatever it might be. So certainly change is as good as a holiday, and it freshens the thinking and just changes your perspective on things. Even the act of commuting, I think, becomes a circuit breaker from the standard, whatever your standard routine as well, if you do work from home. So yeah, I really recommend it.
I want to just get back to a little bit the expectation v reality. What has surprised you the most about running your business full time now?
I don't want to sound boastful or like I'm bragging or anything, but I had a lot of anxiety about the viability of it. I think even from just handing in my resignation and knowing that this moment was coming when the salary was going to stop arriving, I was pretty nervous and had a lot of self-doubt about whether this would actually work. I tested a little bit. I had 3 clients, which wasn't enough to that was a side hustle level. So I guess I've been surprised, really positively surprised about some of the early traction that I've got as we're talking now, almost 3 months in, and have managed to sign 5 new clients and have hit the ground running. I was expecting a much longer kind of ramp up to seeing revenue growth than what I have. I think for me now it's about keeping those clients, keeping them happy, and getting more efficient and effective at how I deliver the work. So I think that's been a really positive surprise.
And I don't think that's boastful at all, by the way. I think we often feel that way when it's something that we're doing. We're like, oh, I don't want to say it's going well. I don't know, I'm going to jinx myself, or don't want to come across that way. But it's really important that we hear this, that it's normal to step into something with anxiety and not knowing how it's going to turn out. It is very possible that it's going to turn out really well. And, you're going to tackle each thing head on as you go. One thing that I'm really interested in, Ness, is I just find this fascinating about your business, because you are a ghostwriter, essentially. Just the whole concept of marketing your services becomes very multi-layered, because, it's not like you can call out case studies and sell on, I've worked with companies like this. Social proof becomes a more challenging area of marketing yourself. And it's more challenging in terms of even word of mouth. Perhaps your customer or your client that you're working with doesn't want anybody to know that they're actually working with you. I imagine there are those use cases where people are like, oh, I don't necessarily want to publicly say that I'm getting to my outcome in this way, despite it being a very helpful service. Talk to me a little bit about that. What has been your experience with it? How do you get around this? Because it is such a cool offering. You don't have that social proof as often to sell from.
Yeah, so I was definitely of the same mindset of thinking, how is anyone going to know, I guess, what I'm doing and that I can actually deliver value? I've definitely found, it's not a huge sample size, but I've definitely found more clients are actually almost proud of having a ghostwriter that is helping them create thought leadership content. So I actually do get quite a lot of word of mouth referrals, which surprised me. I think as well, when it comes to social proof and talking about that, I de-identify people, change their names, things like that, and share statistics and results and things that are de-identified to sort of get around that. But I've definitely been surprised at how strong that word of mouth referral. I think as well, actually, it's almost secondhand word of mouth referral. So from someone in my network who knows what I offer, and they're not a client, but they know people who might be interested in it as well. I think I've had some supporters and people who are introducing new people and things like that, which has really helped.
And you bring up a point there that I think it's so obvious when we say it like how you just said it. But for the person that's sitting there building this thing they're really proud of, and it's service-based, and looking at markets like LinkedIn and even just their own personal networks in whatever format, that you have to have potential clients know what you do. And in order to get that, you have to tell them what you do.
Yeah, 100%.
But unfortunately for so many of us, absolutely myself included, like I forget to tell people what I actually do to earn a living through my consulting work completely. I forget to say, this is what I do and this is how you can book me. This is what I do. This is what you can buy from me. Because there's a lot of barriers there, psychological barriers, forgetful barriers. And now you have the benefit, particularly in the LinkedIn space I speak to here, because again, as I said up front, one of the most powerful platforms, just my favorite place to hang out. And you have both benefits in that you are selling a service on LinkedIn and you are helping other people sell themselves on LinkedIn. So you get to see a lot of this. What would you say is the most important thing to think about when telling people about what it is that you do and how they can work with you, so that you can end up the name in somebody's mouth when they're in conversation about that very thing you do?
Yeah, well, I think the most important bit is the telling and is the kind of showing them how they can work with you. And then I think the next layer on that is, and if I look at LinkedIn specifically as a platform, any given post that you share will be seen by probably less than 10% of your networks. If you've got 1,000 connections, probably less than 100 of your own connections will see that one post. So my advice would be, don't just do the, hey, I've started this business post as a one-off. Talk about that regularly. Like you can post that every month, every quarter. Doing that regularly, making sure that you're showing up in people's feed and people are aware. Because as well, no one out there cares about it as much as what you do. And so even if you post it, they might scroll past it and not see it the first time. So I think not being afraid to repeat yourself when it's relevant and as part of that, hey, this is what I'm doing type share, is that here's how you can work with me, here's what I do, here's who I do it for. And just being open in doing that, like do it in your own way, but make sure there's that call to action there, because people, particularly on social media, don't always join the dots themselves or might feel like it's not for them. So I would say do it. Don't be afraid to do it a few times, do it regularly, and then, make the ask. Not every time, but get comfortable with that ask.
Yeah, it's so important. We often forget that, don't we? Get so busy putting out value and insights and knowledge that we forget to say, hey, if you enjoy this is helping you. This is the way in which that you can support me. Now, speaking of great content and putting great things out there, you host a fantastic podcast, which I love because I love podcasts and I love talking about podcasts, but I won't bore you too much with my insights on that. You host a great podcast called The Thought Follow-Up, where you chat to leaders and CEOs about their industries. What role has that played for you in your business? Has it played a role in your marketing? What's that experience been like for you?
Yeah, so it started as a little bit of a passion project. I say in the intro, I'm a curious person. I've always had a lot of questions about life and I've always enjoyed talking to interesting people. So it was a little bit of just exercising that skill. And actually, when I looked at what I was doing from a ghostwriting point of view, one of my favorite parts of it was the interview process. Sitting down and asking someone different questions and hearing what they have to say. So it fed quite nicely into almost like a lead generation tool as well. It helps me spark content ideas, get my brand out there with a relevant audience. And it's helped me, I guess, continue with a stream of content, a steady stream of content that I can reference and ideas that I can draw on.
One of the most successful types of podcasts out there for business, I have my branded podcast hat on now. So a branded podcast being a podcast that is created from a company or a person with a company or a brand owner or a marketer for the purpose of generating a return in either direct revenue, sales, or uplift of affinity, whatever it is, right? You are sitting on an absolute gold mine of B2B relationship lead generation there. And this is something that so many people should think about in the service industry. If you can find a way to use a podcast as you're in with certain people in certain industries to ask them questions about the industries, you can turn that into direct customer relationships.
Yeah, absolutely. That was certainly part of the thought process. I think it's probably helped me. I've had maybe one or two kind of inquiries or leads that have come through from having heard the podcast. I think where, in a surprising way, it's helped me is getting deeper insight into the mindset of potential target customers as well. What are they struggling with? What makes them tick? What are their beliefs and things like that? So it's almost marketing and, I guess, customer insight gold as well. I think where I struggled with it, to be perfectly honest, is is growing it, is growing the audience. Put everything on YouTube as well from a discovery, like a search engine discovery point of view, and made sure I shared content with all my guests for them to share on their networks. But I have struggled to grow the audience to the meaningful size. And, you know, if I compare it to my, like what I could do with a week's worth of LinkedIn content, for example, versus all the work that, you know, goes into creating a podcast episode, where I'm kind of on pause right now, and prepping for season 2 has just been assessing where's the value, how do I get the most value out of it, do it to a high standard and a quality that I'm happy with. But yeah, access some of that gold mine that you're mentioning.
You know, it's funny. I mean, I could just about at this phase start a podcast about podcasting and an audience and all of those things. But because I listen to so many, I won't put another one into the world. But so many people look at the marketing potential of a podcast on the audience that they attract and those people turning into customers. But let's not forget that the person you're interviewing could be the one that becomes your customer. And so then the audience size doesn't matter quite so much. So perhaps a new target could be to go after people you'd like to become your clients and use that as your in, which is more so what I mean by lead generation. But I have just touched on a problem that most people have, which is audience generation for podcasting. That is very normal. I hosted a masterclass recently talking about some of this because the podcast industry is incredibly broken in terms of its data. You can't see all of the data from the shows to know what a successful show number is. If you're getting 30 odd people listening to your podcast, that could be incredibly beneficial. I think everybody's looking for big numbers, vanity metrics, because that's what we're trained to look for. But there's great data that came out recently. It said the median show was achieving 421 listens an episode. That's a median. So think about how many outliers there are on either side of that to get to that space. You've got shows with, 10,000, 100,000 listens every episode. You've got shows with 50. Just depends who your key audience is. But I could wax lyrical about that all day. I will take that offline. So what does success look like for you in your business?
So for me, it's really about work-life balance, which is a term probably everyone talks about and aspires to. You know, I mentioned there having time for myself, whether it's golf or keep the kids out of daycare and go to the zoo or whatever it might be. But so I think being more in control of my time. Then for us as well, it is the flexibility about where we live. So we're currently planning a move back to France to spend time with the family over there and help our kids. Our daughter is bilingual from our last trip, and we want our son now to go through that same experience and I guess give them the gift of a second language and do that before school takes over and gives us a reason that we need to be in a fixed location. So for me, it is really the flexibility of how we use our time and where we live. And I guess from an income point of view and a financial point of view, it's really just what we need to pay the bills and live comfortably and be happy, and nothing really more than that, I guess. I used to have this mindset of I'd love to retire by 50, and stepped back from that and just thought I'd actually much rather enjoy it along the way and have some peaks and troughs around work and stress and life along the journey, rather than just try and sprint to the end and maybe not get there. So that's what success looks like for me.
I think it's just a wonderful way to frame it, because work-life integration and doing work that you like, being able to scale up, down, have flexibility. I mean, that sounds pretty interesting to me. And it keeps us entertained too, right? Having our own business, like we're never bored, that's for sure. To the person listening who may not be a LinkedIn lover yet, is there any generalized advice you would give to them about getting started or growing in the platform?
Look, I think the key to getting started is getting started. Get comfortable with hitting post. I talk a lot about FOPO, fear of posting online, and it's real, and fear of other people's opinions as well.
Oh, yes.
And the only way to get through that is to keep going through it. So I would suggest getting started. Your ego is the thing that's blocking you. It's no one else. No one else is going to care about it as much as what you do when you hit post that first 10, 20, 50 times. So let go of that and let go of what the haters might think and all that kind of stuff. That's really your own ego talking, and see what sticks from there. Like build it as a habit and see what sticks. In terms of growth, maybe similar to the theory around podcasting, you don't necessarily need to have a huge audience either. If it's a relevant audience and an engaged audience, then you can do a lot of really good things with that. So if you're showing up consistently and talking about things that interest your target customer and their pain points and their challenges, then you should have some success.
Absolutely. And yeah, you're bang on in that advice. It's consistency and just showing up is half the battle. Joe, it's been so helpful to have that advice, I think, for so many of us as well. You've got a very cool business, and I'm really excited for you to be at this exciting phase of your journey where you've stepped into it full time and you're getting all of those learnings and able to build something you're really proud of. And it's really great that you're able to come and share some of that, because we don't often enough talk about these early phases and like the testing and the learning. And I just find that so valuable for so many people. So I'm super grateful for you sharing your story with me here today on the pod. And how can the listener and I, in return, support you to keep growing your business?
Feel free to give me a follow on LinkedIn. Hopefully there's something that's valuable in there for you. Of course, if you're looking for some support or some assistance, I've got a bunch of playbooks and resources and things that are available for free, so I can share those with you. If you want to find me on LinkedIn and get in touch, I'd be happy to share some of that knowledge with you. I think would be the best way to support me.
Fantastic. I'll make sure to have the link directly to your LinkedIn profile in the show notes for the listener to go find you, follow you, and get hands on some of those resources. That is awesome. Joe, thank you so much for spending the time with me today. It has been an absolute pleasure to hear your story.
Likewise. Thank you, Kim. Really good to chat to you.
Thank you for listening to Unemployed and Afraid, the podcast for small business builders with your host, me, Kim Curtin. If you love it, you can say thanks with a star rating and a review. And of course, join the community on Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, and LinkedIn. Find us at Unemployed and Afraid wherever you're hanging out, and I'll see you there.